Hello, that was your 2 minutes. Could you please take a seat and we'll get started with the next speaker. Thank you. Okay, while you're sitting down, I'll drown you out so you can't talk anymore by telling you how bad the weather was yesterday at Heathrow Airport. So Sylvia and Marco, who are speaking now, unfortunately their flight was cancelled. I happened to get an earlier flight, but still sat on the tarmac for two hours waiting for the rain to go past so that we could get on the flight. I think that's enough people sat down. Great, okay. So with that, I'm going to host this session with two speakers, both from the University of Goldsmiths. And what I can say is that they're the competitors in London, but we love them a lot. So the first speaker of the two will be Professor Sylvia Pan from Goldsmiths Computer Science. And she will talk, oh, she's there you go, waving. She probably can't see me waving, this is not very interactive, who will talk about embodied social interaction, and Sylvia has worked on a lot on VR and social neuroscience over the last decade, 2 decades probably. Should probably correct me on that. Thank you. Is she back? We can't hear you yet, Sylvia, just a second.
Okay.
No, there you go.
I don't know what else to do.
No,
Is it okay now? Does it work now?
There's some small buttons to click. Small, they're very small. There we go. Great, okay.
Yeah. Okay, does it work now?
Off you go, yes.
Yeah. Thanks, Anthony. I'm not your competitor. We're collaborators. Come on. Well, thanks for the lovely introduction. Yes, I'm Sylvia Pan. I think I know. Yeah, is it possible for me to see the audience? Because I can only see my talk. But anyway, never mind. Don't want to make it too challenging. But now it just really is sadly like me sitting in my study talking to a screen of my own talk. So if I do go off script, which is sometimes what happens when I'm just talking to a computer, that's what happens. Anyway, so yes, I'll be talking about embodied social interaction in VR. So yeah, this is actually, I've never really sort of talked about embodiment as a whole talk. So I'm kind of trying this for the first time. And also another excuse I have is that I normally write my talk on the way to the place I'm presenting, but I wasn't actually never on the way. I made it to the airport, stayed there from 4 p.m. all the way until 10 o'clock, I think. But I had good company. Both Stella and Marco were with me, and our flights were canceled. So I apologize that I have to be presenting in my living room. I would have otherwise really loved to be hanging out with you guys, although my work is about social interaction in VR, but that's actually inspired by my passion about social interaction in real life. Right, okay, so I don't think we need to very much talk about what virtual reality is, but just to remind you, VR is an illusion. It's a strong illusion that takes you somewhere else rather than where you actually are. So you really have this strong, sorry, I'm just going to bring my, because I like to see myself. Yeah, okay, so I know I just changed some settings. Okay, anyway, so that VR gives you illusion, which really makes you feel that you're somewhere else where rather than where you actually are, and really makes you feel that those things are flying towards you. You really have to slash the cues, and to the extent that you don't really care how ridiculous you might look in real life. So VR really, really, really powerful in taking you somewhere else. And this is an example where I tried an application in 2017 in the IEEE VR conference in Los Angeles, where I was in the fMRI brain scan of someone, where I really see kind of brain neurons populated around me. It was such a powerful experience. At the time, I was just finished my work in neuroscience, but I really never truly appreciate how complex the brain was. And that was really the point where I thought, wow, neuroscientists, they're studying the brain is really hard work. It's such a complex space to actually study. And it was fMRI scanning data, so you have the blood flow data as well, which means that in this case, you can actually drag a kind of slider, like you can drag it up and down, so you can see the color change, which is kind of represents the blood flow of the scanning you're getting from fMRI. So it's a very powerful tool. It really kind of changes something quite fundamental rather than images you might see on a 2D screen. And I think another really powerful aspect of VR, which is kind of more related to how I got into VR, is power to actually bring you to be with somebody else. So I've done quite a bit of work, as Anthony said, 20 years, starting in the very lab where Anthony works now, in the cave-like system with Professor Mel Slater and Matt Kokilas, who's going to talk next, in creating social experiences and testing them in those kind of immersive systems and see what impact it might have on our social interaction or our understanding about ourselves. So this, I'm going to try to play this video. Hopefully it's going to play smoothly, and hopefully you can hear the sound as well.
You're usually at ease when talking to someone of the opposite sex.
Say it again?
You're usually at ease when talking to someone of the opposite sex.
Oh, don't really have to ask this question.
It would be nice if you could, yeah.
I disagree.
You try to avoid talking to people unless you know them well.
No, I disagree.
If the chance comes to meet new people, you often take it.
Well, it depends on who they are, but I agree, I suppose. Yeah, so for me, that's kind of a classic example of how virtual social interaction work. And in this case, we were just using motion capture data. We motion captured one actress where she actually followed exactly the same script that she acted out twice. Once she behaved as if she was very shy, and the other time, like you see, she behaved as if she's very confident, almost a bit aggressive. And we were basically testing the impact of kind of body movement could have on social interaction, given that the script she's saying is exactly the same. And what we observed, obviously, there are some really interesting findings I don't have time to really share in this talk. But what I found really interesting is that this participant is actually a friend of a friend, and his friend afterwards, like someone we know in common afterwards, come back and complain to me like he was really stressed after the interaction. So what have I done to his friend, right? So it really makes me think, sometimes experiences you had in VR could have a real impact on yourself to the extent nobody would actually be expecting. And the reason why I'm also showing this study, which is an early study we've done in the cave-like system, is also because in the cave, you can actually see your own body. You're not really wearing a kind of HMD in the same sense as we do. It's almost like a mixed reality. You have a pair of see-through glasses. Everything is sort of projected on the screen you're seeing, which also means that you can actually see your body as they are. With HMD, this interaction is very different. We actually have to make a virtual body and align it with your movement and everything to make it work. But this also means that we have the opportunity to actually make this virtual body of yourself slightly different from your own. And I think that is not a point I have to explain a lot about. There are lots of neuroscience talks ahead of this one that's already touched upon this point. But actually, it was sort of proposed again by Professor Mel Slater, I think it was back in 2006. We first heard about this idea about VR can transform not only where you are, but who you are. And at the time, at the UCL lab, there were lots of work had to be done for this embodied illusion to actually happen. As you can see, she's wearing a kind of full body suit, and there are sort of trackers built in the room. She's wearing a HMD this big, and obviously there's lots of system integration you have to do to make it happen. But when that happens, you actually have really nice embodied illusion. You really feel that the person you see in the mirror is you, and when you look down, you see where you expect to see your real body, you see a virtual body. And this virtual body could look like something very similar to yourself, or it can be something that actually is quite different. And this is obviously not something that has been discovered by computer scientists, but rather there were quite a couple of studies in neuroscience and the neuroscience space about embodiment. where obviously they don't have fancy sort of technical setup as the one we can do in the VR lab, but rather they were using rubber hand illusion or effacement illusion, where you just caress someone's face where they're seeing on video another face being synchronously caressed, so that they have this feeling of that person they're seeing is actually themselves. And there were lots of studies in neuroscience showing that only another body actually affects social cognition. And obviously, I'm going to mention this study, but I think half of the people in the room probably are very much familiar with this study already, which is Tabitha Peck and Mel Slater's study in 2013 about putting yourself in the skin of a black avatar actually reduces your implicit racial bias. And I mean, Art sent a email telling us to try to explain everything if we can. I know half of you in the room, probably neuroscientists, know exactly what implicit association test is. But for the sake of the other half, I'm going to try to explain it. So basically, how implicit association tests work is that you are given a computer and you are told to, whenever you see a positive word, press the right-hand side key. When I see a negative word, you press the key on your left-hand side, right? So you have to do it as quickly as you can. There'll be like new words popping up. But then you're also told to press the right-hand side key when you see a white person, and the left key when you see a black person. Okay, so you're told to do this as quickly as you can, obviously with different stimuli. And then that's one task. Another sort of condition, you are told to press the right key when you see a positive word or a black person, and you're going to press the left-hand side key when you see a negative word or a white person. So what's happening is that for the majority of us, unfortunately, we're influenced by kind of the culture we're immersed in, or stereotypes and everything, that most of us will happen to actually perform slower in the task that's in red, and will be faster in the other task when we because our brain is kind of shaped by the kind of culture to associate more positive content with Caucasian and negative content with African origin people, right? So obviously there are people who can do this task differently, right? But for most of us, we'll be slower in the first one, right? So the implicit association test basically tests the difference in our reaction time between these two different tasks. And the difference here, most people will be a positive value, is our IAT, is how racially biased we are towards people with darker skin. And obviously what we do in VR is we can give this test twice, once before we go inside VR and another time after we go inside the VR. And what it has been found is through Tabitha's work and many other work that has been run afterwards, is that virtual reality being in the skin of a dark skin avatar actually reduces our implicit racial bias. Which is, something really, I think is really interesting, because it's a reaction time task. It's not like a questionnaire asking you how racist you are, because we're all going to say we're not racist, right? So I think this task on its own is very, very interesting. What's more interesting is there was another study that has been done by Domina Banaco and Mel Slater in 2020, where they put participants in the body of different avatars, black and white, but then during that process, during their time in VR, they also have different experiences. They would have had positive experience, neutral experience, and negative experience. And what they found is, again, if they are in the body of black avatar and then they had positive experience, they then have a reduction of their IAT, so they become slightly less racially biased. That's great. That's consistent with the findings before. But what's also very interesting is that if they were in a dark skin avatar, but then they had negative experience, there's actually evidence suggesting towards that they might actually became a bit more racially biased due to the negative experience they've had when they were embodied in a dark skin avatar. And I thought that is really interesting, because basically that means that this embodiment illusion is double-edged sword. We need to really use it carefully. It's not, it's not kind of a solution to solve racism. Actually, it has a potential to bring more problems to lots of social attitude we have. And Most of this, oh yeah, and there's another study I thought was very interesting because I think everybody's understand embodiment and knows the impact it could have. But what I'm really interested in is instead of just using questionnaires, how can we kind of find more evidence to really review what embodiment actually does? What's the consequence of embodiment to our brain? I think that's any evidence we can kind of show that goes beyond questionnaire. I'm very interested in. So I'm interested in kind of the result from implicit association test, but there's another type of test. I mean, okay, you are slightly less racially biased, but what does it actually mean, right? So this study, again, conducted by, I'm not going to be able to say their family names, but basically it's Anna, Domina, Nadia, and Mel in 2017. They have conducted a study where they had participants embodied in either a child's body or adult's body, but in the adult's case, they scaled the adult down to the size of a child, right? So you're an adult, but you're just a very small adult. You still see your body proportion as an adult, where for a child, you really have the feeling that you are a child. And I did the same experiment. And other than the IAT result, what they have also found is they found behavior change in terms of estimation of size. So what they found is that after going through these two different embodiment situations, they then asked participants to estimate the size of a box in front of them. So they can just gesture with their hand, say, hey, I think this is the size of the box, right? And what they found is that if you have embodied in a childlike avatar, then you actually tend to overestimate the size of the box. And that is not the case if you're embodied in an adult avatar, although it has been scaled down, but you still don't have the overestimation as much as if you were embodied in a child avatar. So I found that really, really interesting. So basically we tried to, we got really interested in this idea of embodiment, and as a lab, we started doing experiment on that as well. So I just want to add, lots of the study I've showed here early on had to use this kind of full body tracking. But I think most of us working in VR, we understand that nowadays we can actually just very simply use the VR headset itself to actually create embodiment. Sometimes the result is not ideal. I mean, this case is actually good because we're using a Quest Pro, which means that the hand tracker is actually has camera on its own, so it doesn't actually lose track, right? So if you're using a Quest 3 or something, when your hands goes back, the hands are actually no longer tracked. But in this case, we're using a Quest Pro so that your hands are actually always tracked. So what we were able to then use embody in is we wanted to basically use embodiment to really think about, okay, so what are the areas that we think that we can really benefit from being able to use embodiment to change people's attitudes and behavior. So in particular, I'm going to show kind of 3 studies we have been doing in the lab. The first one is published, the second one is under review, the third one is ongoing studies. I won't be able to show the result from the third one, but I just want to show you the methodology we have been using. So the 3 studies, the first one was about training medical doctors in medical communication. And the second one, I think, is on a topic that's super related to to everyone nowadays, is climate change. Can we actually use VR to change people's not only attitude but behavior, to actually drive them to actually have some action in their everyday life? And then the third one is to train social workers for them to be more empathetic towards the child that could be involved in domestic violence. So how much more time? I think I have 15 more minutes or some things. I'm going to try to spend about 3 or 4 minutes each study. So the first one was delivering bad news. It was a collaboration with Great Ormond Street Hospital. It was led by Tara Collins Williams, who is a lecturer at Goldsmiths and finishing her PhD with us. And from Gosh, we had 2 medical doctors, Pratibha and Caroline Furtman. They're both pediatricians. So basically, one of the situations they found that's very tricky is sometimes they need to tell not the patient, but a parent of the patient that is a sort of routine sort of surgical procedure or something has now been canceled. So that's basically the sort of setting of this study. Because when you tell the mother of a patient that, hey, you have been waiting for a very long time, but now, unfortunately, we cannot do this thing we have planned to do to your child has been sedated, but unfortunately, you're going to have to take your child back and come back again, right? This happens very often in hospitals because whenever there's an emergency situation, another child's life is on the line, all the sort of staff have to rush into the surgical room. Nobody can perform a routine procedure, although it's been scheduled maybe month in advance, right? That's just the situation. And then very often a random member of staff in the hospital will have to then inform the mother and have this conversation. Now, obviously, she's going to be upset. And sometimes you'll find that slightly tricky to handle. So I'm not going to show you the conversation, but I just want to show you the kind of quality of animation we were able to produce for this study. So we had a professional actress coming in, and this is some of the.
This is happening today. I am not going home today. Now, I don't care about the other patients. I'm sorry. I just care about my son. Are you saying that my child is not a priority?
Yeah, so we did motion capture data. We also worked with the animation studio to tidy up the animation to make sure it's really at a quality that really makes people sort of convinced that this is a real person you're talking to rather than a virtual human, which hopefully you kind of do that. So what we did here is we get a medical doctor to come in, put a VR headset on, and they see a patient in front of them, and there is a little child, laying beside them as well. And they have to then break the bad news to the parent, right? But because they're doing it in VR headset, so we're able to actually record everything. We are able to record the virtual body we have generated for the participant. We're able to record the animation and sound, and then we can replay what they have experienced. But what we did is we replayed it. We had two conditions. In one condition, we replayed everything in the body as a third person perspective. So you're just kind of seeing a playback from as a third person. You can see how, mother says something, you said something. But in another condition, we actually replayed it from the patient's perspective, right? So our hypothesis here is that if you're seeing everything, seeing the replay from the patient's perspective, you might be able to actually have a better opportunity to learn what you have done, to have a different perspective in understanding your performance. And the way we measured it, there are many different questionnaires and things we use, but we also used something called checklist, which is basically a list of things that they use in medical communication training, where it's a list of 18 items, including things like, have you introduced yourself? Have you checked if the other person has understood what you say? Have you determined what they know at this point, right? So these are a checklist of 18 items. And what we did is after they have gone through the VR situation, they go through the checklist and try to tick, how many of these 18 items they think they have done, performed well. And then they see a replay of how they've done, either as a third person or from the body of the patient or of the mother of the patient. And then they go through this checklist again, right? And our hypothesis is that if they have gone through from the patient's perspective, they would be able to realize actually they missed out more items than they thought compared to the third person. So that's the result. So you can see there is generally maybe a slight downward trend for the post, right? So basically it's kind of fitting up hypothesis, which is that when they just done it, they think they did well, but when they see a replay of what happened, they realize they haven't actually covered certain items. They have this kind of reflection and realization. But the interesting question is not this. The interesting question is there a difference between when they experience it from a third person comparing to experience it from the body of a patient? And unfortunately there isn't. So we didn't actually see a difference. So the y-axis here is the difference of the checklist, right? So as we can see, there is no difference. Basically, either seeing it from a first person or third person. However, we did observe a difference. So our participants had about half of them are actually medical doctors or consultants, and the other half are nurses. So we did see a difference in nurses. So basically, if you are a medical doctor, there's almost no difference between your pre and post checklist, right? But if you were a nurse, the chances are you actually identified, you realize you missed out more items after you see the replay, right? And then we also went through some of the other sort of questionnaires we collected, and we found there's a trend in difference in level of stress and a difference in level of nervousness as well. So basically, although our manipulation didn't quite work, but we're able to see that, okay, nurses actually were able to learn more from our setting, no matter which condition they were, right? So that's still very interesting. And some comments from the study as well. It's incredibly realistic. I felt I was there. It's like you're actually there. You look around and see everything as if you're really in the hospital room. So we made actually lots of effort in modeling the room and fiddling with the lightings. I think that was a talk from Michael in the morning. And I will also make sure, whatever thing we do, it is still actually, because you keep everything at a high frame rate. Otherwise, it would make people sick. And then there was also comments about, getting the opportunity to watch yourself back is amazing. It's really fascinating. So people definitely appreciated being able to see yourself back inside VR. I was quite surprised to hear how hesitant my voice sounded. So that's, again, very interesting notes. And people definitely find it very stressful, and they feel themselves shaking a lot and very nervous. Right. So, but I will probably go back to this and reflect on kind of our findings. But again, so that's kind of the first study. We kind of try to use embodiment to see if it helped in terms of training. We see some improvement, but embodiment didn't actually do anything in this case. I'll come back to this. So I'm going to show the second study, which is a collaboration with the SeeVR Lab from Barcelona, led by Professor Mel Slater. Well, in this work, we worked with Justina Sweetruck, a postdoc researcher with Mel, and it was led by our PhD student, Claire Yukopi. So this is really about using embodiment. It's fascinating technology, but what is the most important issues we have to tackle in humanity? I mean, you'll agree, climate change, right? But I mean, everybody understand the impact of climate change, but sometimes we feel that there's not much we can do. But there's actually sort of behaviorally, there are little things we can do, and also bigger things as well. But so in order to kind of really, to test if we can use embodiment to induce a behavior change, so the design of the experiment is that you first go into VR as a child, some 15 years ago, when everything is beautiful. And then you go into VR again as a young adult, which is kind of the profile of most of participants in their sort of early 20s, which is kind of present, right? Which is, things are not as ideal. We already see signs of, something disastrous is about to happen. And then you go to 15 years later as a parent, you have a child, and the kind of the impact of climate change is really having an impact on our future, on our living environment. But then we also wrap everything up in a positive future scenario, because we want people to leave the scenario with kind of a positive feeling. So I'm going to show some videos of what we actually, so this is, again, a visualization of what we've done 15 years ago and recently, where you were a young adult, and 15 years later, when you become a parent and your child lives in a very different environment from when you grew up. And then 50 years later, when actually we have done something, and then we were able to then have a bright future together. So yes, I'm gonna show the videos. So you.
Hello, welcome back to 15 years ago. Please perform the following actions. Please look down at your body and look around to see the changes in your surroundings. Well done. It's time to look in the mirror. Brilliant. Please move your right arm and move your left arm. Excellent. You are ready to explore this world now.
Let's watch this documentary on TV. It's really interesting.
Depends on one thing: water. In a land burdened by heat and drought, a single ribbon cuts its reliable course through the wilderness.
The weather looks good outside.
Great and small.
Let's hope it will last a few days.
We can walk, actually.
Hey, look. Did you see that animal outside? I think it was a rabbit.
Okay. And then you jump forward to recently.
Our message,
Oh, where's it? 50 years later, I want to see.
our message.
Oh, 15 years later. Okay, so this is recently, I think.
And move your left arm. Excellent. You are ready to explore this world now.
Okay, so I think somehow I managed to edit out the bit of recently where it's just a young adult, where things is basically like presence, what you see. And now this is 15 years later, you become a parent.
Our message.
and move your left arm. Excellent. You are ready to explore this world now.
One thing I really miss is fresh fruit. We haven't had any for ages. You don't let me go out and play anymore.
And then in the end, they go to a very positive future. Oh, I think I disabled sound. Yeah, so basically you are, you are kind of a floating soul, but you can see you're, a young person basically thanking you for what you have done in order to actually make change happen. So that's, the climate change study. And then we had two different conditions between group. You either go through the embodiment group, which is the video I have shown, or you go through a non-embodied group where you're just a kind of floating soul hanging around and seeing everything happen. And importantly, we did lots of different measurements. Importantly, we have collected their carbon footprint data, which is using a carbon footprint calculator from the WWF webpage, where I can see your carbon footprint consumption, which is about how many flights you take, how much money you spend on food, how much meat you eat, do you drive an electric car, how much transportation you use, how much money you spend on like clothing and stuff like that. Right, so we had the carbon footprint calculator. Participant will fill that in before they come into VR. And then we can't have it immediately after VR because we won't expect any immediate, it's going to be exactly the same answer like how much you spend on food or drinks, right? But rather we measure carbon footprint again 2 weeks after they have been to VR. And then we measured it again to see if the experiment has had any long-term effect. We also measured it again after 6 weeks. And what we found is that we did Bayesian analysis. So the first one is the ratio of carbon footprint 2 over carbon footprint 1, which is the kind of immediate effect 2 weeks after this. Is there any kind of behavior change we can observe after you have been to the experiment? And so as you can see in the observed group, which is the control group, there's almost no change. So basically, carbon footprint 2 over 1 is 1, right? There's no change, it's the same score. However, for the embodied group, you do see a drop. So they have slightly less carbon footprint after 2 weeks after they have experienced VR, which is very interesting. And I can see this trend kind of continued for the 6 weeks questionnaire as well, but it's not as significant. So basically there's an effect, but the effect didn't actually last very long. So that's what we found for this study. And just very briefly, we have also then conducted a study where we use similar methodology, but I'm just gonna actually show a video instead. Okay, so basically you are embodied in a child, so you're in front of mirror and you can sort of place some blocks and put a hat on you, and then things goes dark and bright again, and what you see is you're at a breakfast table, you have your father and your mother having breakfast, everything felt very lovely and nice, but then all of a sudden your father becomes verbally abusive to your mother and actually sort of left halfway. I don't want to show the video because it's actually very stressful to watch. But the important thing here is that you either have that embodied stage where you see yourself as a child in a mirror, and then you see everything from the child perspective at a breakfast table, or you didn't have that embodied stage, you were just sitting there and then you may see the same blocks, and then you saw everything from a third person perspective, right? So I don't have data to show because this is an ongoing study, but the idea is that we're putting social workers through this experience. And the idea is that sometimes they're dealing with domestic abuse situation, and it has been found that sometimes they don't really pay enough attention to the child, to the potential psychological abuse, psychological impact on the child when there isn't any physical violence involved, right? And this is not a point that's kind of easy for social workers to actually kind of remember to make notes of this. So the idea is we can put them in situations like that and to see maybe next time when they're dealing with situations, they will remember this experience, so they will have strategies that involves more care towards the child. So I'm going to skip the video. So just a quick summary. I think I'm going to wrap up in the next 2 to 3 minutes if I have the time. Yes. So we've done quite many other embodiment study in the lab, but here I kind of picked 3 to show. For the first one, we didn't see any difference. For the second one, we saw we have seen some behavior change difference, and the third one I don't have data because it's a ongoing study. So just kind of putting them together and look at what we have done right and wrong. So yeah, I think importantly with the first study, we think the reason why it didn't work is because we didn't really have an embodiment stage when they were embodied in the patient, when they had this kind of body swap, you can call it, right? Because you were a doctor, you saw this patient, and then the next moment you were in the body of a patient. We didn't really give them time to be in front of a mirror to really take the identity of the patient, but rather we just put them there in the body of a patient, and then we give them some quite stressful experience, right? So maybe in a way, although maybe how to say, cognitively you kind of really felt you were in the body of this patient, but the experience itself is so unpleasant, you kind of actually suppress the idea. So the embodiment in this case didn't really work. For the second study, for the behavior change, we really worked on making sure they have the time to look themselves in the mirror. They really have that time to sort of create that identity. If embodiment is about being in somebody else's shoes, they really had the time to put the shoes on properly and then work on it and get used to it. And in this case, we did observe a behavior change. So it did actually work towards the direction we wanted to. And the third one, again, I think we did put them in the body of a child. And we did give them the time to actually feel the embodiment, pick up, all the sort of cues and everything. But then I was thinking, we don't have the result yet, obviously, I can't comment on that. But we did actually put them in a quite stressful negative experience. So in a way, just by putting these studies together makes me think, by putting them in a negative experience, are we actually jeopardizing the kind of whole embodiment procedure we're having, or are we actually going to have consequences where they actually didn't like the experience they have in the body of a child, therefore we're generating attitude that's actually more hostile towards a child, right? So that's something I think we need to definitely think about. So yeah, so just to summarize, for future studies, we would like to really pay attention to, the embodiment that just doesn't just happen automatically by being in the body of somebody else. Being in front of the mirror, giving them time to actually pick it up is important. We really need to be careful of the actual experience they have as part of this embodiment experience. Is it going to be negative or positive? And we should try to make the experience as positive as possible for various reasons. And I think actually when it's positive, it's going to be more likely to work in terms of us picking up the cue, the participant picking up the cue as the body you wish them to embody in. And I think from an experimental perspective, I think it was really important that we all had a control condition for whatever we're trying to study. Because embodiment, we all know embodiment works, but it's difficult to say, what effect is just from sort of being somewhere, being involved in the social interaction, but what is really that kind of the addition of being in the body of somebody else actually brings. So I think it's really, really important to have a control condition so you actually can understand what the experiment is telling you. And also in all situations, we have used between group design. So for each participant, they only went through one of the conditions. They either have an embodied condition or they have an observed condition. And I think that, again, is very important. In particular, for instance, the climate change experiment, we were able to not only test the effect of climate change, but also we had a follow-on, so we can understand long-term effect of that as well. If it's a within group, then it will be a lot more difficult to understand the effect of embodiment. So that's kind of everything I wanted to say. I just want to, because this is about social interaction, and everybody lots of you have showed this kind of metaverse social VR. And I think embodiment will become, especially embodiment within kind of social interaction, will be an interesting topic. I have, during COVID, I've spent lots of time in social VR, but not so much afterwards. But should the technology improve, it is possible all of us are going to spend more time in it. And as you can see, when you go into social VR, especially in a sort of social setting rather than a work setting, you are likely to use bodies that are so different from yourself. So it's really important before we are there to understand the impact of embodiment, the virtual body you choose. How will that shape your cognition, your attitude towards many important issues? And yes, I think I didn't have these slides, but somebody was talking about a homunculus, the sensory homunculus earlier, so I thought add this as well. So the, I don't know, left or right, left-hand side for yourself, is how computers see us, you know, with most of the tablets, iPhone, computers, where just one eye, one finger, we only need one finger to press the like button. And we have 2 ears because we have stereo headphones. So that's kind of how the digital space, how as humans we're connected to the digital space. But who we really are is this kind of sensory sort of. This is the brain representation of different brain regions actually are represented. And I think VR is actually a great way to to help us to break the interface, to break the kind of constraint that the current 2D interface is putting on us, because they actually VR, if you look at this monster, it has a massive head and massive hands, and that's exactly where the VR controller we're holding and the sort of head mounted display we're wearing. So this is actually a good way for us to really represent us digitally. So I do see VR as the future interface to the digital world. Okay, so yes, I would have loved to deliver this in person. I think, yeah, I normally actually only think about what I want to say when I'm on stage. So sorry if it's a bit not very clearly delivered. So I'm leading the SeeVR Lab together with Professor Marco Gillis, who is going to speak next. We don't normally have presentations in the same conference. Just, the first time we were trying to go to the same conference and both present, the flight got cancelled, so it's probably saying something. And yeah, these are some of our collaborators, other universities, companies, but also the creative industry as well, which I think is really important if you want to get sort of VR experiences right. And just a bit of advertisement. So I am in the organizing committee of since I am in Germany now, in June next year, we're organizing a Mind XR conference about shaping the future of mental health care. So if you're interested in speaking or attending, please drop me a message. Okay, I think that's everything. And I need to stop sharing.
Okay, Sylvia, thank you. The crowd is clapping. I don't know if you can hear that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I hijacked Anthony's role. I mean, he had to run to a call. Anyway, so since we are running a little bit behind the schedule, there's a social event scheduled like right after. Would be nice if you were here, but you're not. So yeah, okay. Well, anyway, so we see you probably soon, and now let's just hand over to Marco. Thank you, Sylvia.
Bye.